The air in the abandoned Branch Bank Old Safety Deposit room was a thick stew of dust and forgotten metal, a smell I'd grown intimately familiar with over the years. My gloved fingers brushed along the cold steel of a partially opened deposit box, the mechanism stiff with disuse, its hinge groaning a silent protest. A thin film of grime coated everything, a testament to decades of neglect. I straightened, wincing at the ache in my lower back, and took a slow breath, the filtered air tasting faintly of rust. Another 3 hours, and I could finally sign off on this grim archaeological dig. The bones, fragments of a forgotten tragedy from the 1930s, were now meticulously bagged and tagged, ready for the climate-controlled lab. My work here was done, for now. Just as I was wiping down my equipment, the vibration of my comms unit startled the quiet. I tugged it from my belt, the screen illuminating the caller ID. An unknown number, but with the distinctive regional code that usually meant trouble, or at least another call for my particular skill set. "Seth here," I answered, my voice a little rough from the dry air. A voice, crisp and professional, cut through the static. "Mr. Holt, Detective Harding, we have a situation. Blackwood Manor. Are you available?" Blackwood Manor. The name conjured images of sprawling Gothic architecture and a history as dense as old parchment. It was a local landmark, steeped in whispers of antiquity and the eccentricities of its past owners. My mind immediately shifted gears from the Depression-era bank vault to the sprawling estate. "I'm available, Detective. Just wrapping up a historic preservation project," I replied, glancing around the dusty vault one last time. "What's the situation?" "Dr. Alistair Finch," the detective stated, his tone flat. "Found at the bottom of the west stairwell. Appears to be an accidental fall. Local authorities are already on scene, but given his prominence and the manor's unique history, we felt it best to bring in someone with your specific expertise." My brow furrowed. Dr. Alistair Finch, the celebrated historian, known for his controversial theories on ancient civilizations and his extensive collection of artifacts. An accidental fall, they said. My experience had taught me that very few things in my line of work were ever truly accidental when a prominent figure was involved. "I'll need an hour to secure my current findings and make the drive," I informed him. "Send me the coordinates." The journey to Blackwood Manor took me deep into the rolling hills, past ancient gnarled oak trees and stone walls draped in ivy. It was exactly as I'd pictured, imposing, isolated, and undeniably beautiful in a brooding way. A uniformed officer waved me through the iron gates, which stood ajar, their elaborate scrollwork hinting at a bygone era. Emergency vehicles, their lights muted, dotted the gravel drive. I parked behind a nondescript sedan and gathered my field kit, the familiar weight of it a comfort. Detective Harding, a man whose weary eyes held the weight of too many grim discoveries, met me at the grand entrance. He was flanked by a younger, eager-looking colleague who clutched a notepad. "Holt, thanks for coming so quickly," Harding said, extending a hand. "Scene is contained. Preliminary assessment from the first responding officer and the regional examiner points to a fall. Finch was apparently alone in the manor." "Understood," I replied, my gaze sweeping over the ornate foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light filtering through the tall, leaded glass windows. The air here was different from the bank vault, rich with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. "He was found here," Harding indicated, leading me to a sweeping staircase that dominated the hall. "The body has been moved to a temporary holding area on site, awaiting transport," the detective explained. "We've secured the area, of course, but the initial impression was straightforward." I knelt, my eyes already tracing lines, angles, and textures. The marble steps, worn smooth in places by centuries of footsteps, showed no obvious signs of struggle. No scuff marks, no displaced debris that didn't belong. But my training wasn't about the obvious. It was about the microscopic, the anachronistic. My gaze drifted to the banister. It was a masterpiece of craftsmanship, intricate carvings depicting mythical creatures. As I ran a gloved hand along its length, I noticed something. A faint, almost imperceptible scratch near the base of one of the carved newel posts. It wasn't fresh, not obviously, but it was odd. It was too precise, too clean for an accidental impact, almost like a deliberate score, and the angle felt off. Then I saw it, further down, near the faint bloodstain on the marble. Not wood. It looked like obsidian. My fingers, practiced in such delicate recovery, carefully nudged it onto a sterile evidence card. I straightened slowly, my eyes scanning the entire stairwell again, from the ornate ceiling high above to the meticulously patterned rug at the top. The official narrative was a simple fall, yet the small, sharp scratch on the newel post, and now this tiny shard of obsidian. They were discordant notes in a symphony of accident. They didn't fit. They were anachronistic. And in my world, anachronisms were rarely benign. This wasn't going to be straightforward at all. The air in the manor's grand hall still clung to the chill of the morning, a quiet tension settling after the initial flurry of activity. My initial assessment of the steps had yielded nothing overt, but the absence of obvious signs was, in itself, a sign. The lead investigator, a man whose stern gaze missed little, had decided against moving Dr. Finch's remains to any conventional facility. "Too many eyes, Seth," he'd rumbled, his voice low enough to be almost a whisper in the echoing space. "This needs a discreet approach." And so, under a shroud of night, or what felt like it in the heavily curtained vehicle, I found myself supervising the transfer. The journey was short, hushed. We bypassed the main entrance of the derelict building, instead pulling around to a service alley, a discreet steel door groaning open to swallow us whole. Inside, the silence was absolute, heavier than the manor's, punctuated only by the scuff of our boots on the grimy linoleum. The main banking hall was a ghost of its former self. Teller windows boarded up, dust motes dancing in the single work light the team had rigged. But the true heart of our operation lay beyond a formidable rusted vault door. It stood ajar, a gaping maw of dark steel, a testament to bygone security. Rows of empty, numbered boxes, once guarding secrets and fortunes, now stared blankly from the walls, their brass fronts tarnished and dull. The air was thick with the scent of aged metal, dust, and something else. A faint metallic tang that bespoke forgotten transactions. A makeshift examination table had been set up in the center, stark white against the drab surroundings, illuminated by a focused, adjustable lamp. Dr. Finch's remains, now carefully covered, lay awaiting my meticulous attention. I moved with practiced efficiency, my kit bag thudding softly onto a cleared section of a defunct counter. The lead investigator and a single colleague remained, their presence a silent, watchful perimeter. First, a comprehensive external examination. I activated a powerful magnification lamp, its beam cutting through the gloom, highlighting every minute detail on the surface of the skin, the weave of the clothes. Finch's face, pale and still, bore the impact of the fall, a deep laceration across the temple, bruising blossoming around the eyes. These were consistent with the initial report, the tragic tumble down marble steps. But my focus was deeper, beyond the obvious. I began with the hands, turning them gently, examining the nails, the delicate skin between the fingers. Then the forearms, the elbows, the shoulders. My fingers, sensitive and trained, probed the underlying bone structure, searching for the subtle language of trauma. It was when I reached the left humerus that I felt it. A minute, almost imperceptible discontinuity. I adjusted the lamp, bringing its intense focus to bear. Through my magnifying loops, I saw it. Not a clean break, but a network of tiny, almost crystalline hairline fractures radiating from a central point on the medial aspect of the bone. My breath hitched, A silent, internal alarm. These were not the typical compression fractures one would expect from a fall onto hard ground, especially not in that specific location, given the reported trajectory. A fall down steps usually resulted in impact fractures to the head, often the hips, sometimes the spine, and occasionally defensive injuries to the forearms or hands. These specific microfractures in the humerus, however, suggested a localized rotational stress, an impact delivered from an atypical angle, entirely inconsistent with a simple, uncontrolled tumble. It spoke of a different kind of force, perhaps a twist, a wrench, or even a precisely delivered blow. I documented everything meticulously, photographing the area from multiple angles, taking precise measurements. The lead investigator shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning faintly. He didn't speak, but his gaze was a constant heavy weight. Next, the clothing. I began with the jacket, systematically brushing it with a fine bristled forensic brush, collecting any loose fibers or particulates onto adhesive lifts. The usual suspects appeared: wool fibers, dust from the manor, a few strands of gray hair. But then, as I moved to the deep folds of the waistcoat, particularly around the lower pockets and the inside cuff, my loops caught something else. Tiny, almost iridescent flecks. They were not fibers, nor common dust. I carefully collected a sample with a pair of fine-tipped tweezers, transferring them to a sterile evidence container. Under the microscope, they revealed themselves as a fine, gritty powder, almost luminous in its pale ochre hue. It had a crystalline structure, unlike any common soil or building material. It didn't resemble anything I'd seen during my preliminary examination of the manor, or anything I would expect from an ancient, well-maintained stone building. I ran a quick field test, a basic chemical indicator, not for identification but for general classification. The reaction was subtle but distinct, pointing towards a unique mineral composition, rich in silicates and trace elements not indigenous to this region. This was foreign. It shouldn't be here. It shouldn't be on Dr. Finch. My initial suspicion, a faint tremor beneath the surface of my professional detachment, now solidified into an unshakable conviction. The microscopic fractures, inconsistent with the fall, and now this anomalous mineral dust. These were not the hallmarks of a tragic accident. Finch hadn't simply fallen. He had been put in a position to fall, or perhaps even forced. I lifted my head, meeting the lead investigator's eyes across the sterile table. His expression was unreadable, but I knew in that shared moment that he understood the implications as well as I did. This was no accident. This was murder. And the game had just begun. To the upper landing. Head hit the newel post at the bottom. Nasty. I traced the path with my eyes, from the top of the stairs to the outline. The scuff mark on the wall was an anomaly. If Finch had fallen forward, tumbling down, how could his body have scraped that high up, so far from the trajectory of a simple fall? It suggested a different kind of movement, perhaps a struggle, or an attempt to brace himself against something that wasn't there. My internal alarm bells, usually a quiet hum, now began to ring with a clearer, more insistent tone. This was no simple accident. The mortuary was sterile, a stark contrast to the decaying grandeur of Blackwood Manor. Dr. Finch's body, now laid out on a cold steel table, presented a different challenge. The initial autopsy report was concise. Massive blunt force trauma to the cranium, consistent with a fall. But my work began where theirs ended. I wasn't looking for the obvious. I was looking for the whispers. I started with the skull, my gloved fingers tracing the hairline fracture that spiderwebbed across the left temporal bone. The report noted it was consistent with impact against the newel post. But as I examined the fracture under my magnifying lamp, something caught my eye. A series of minute, almost invisible microfractures radiating outwards, not just from the main point of impact, but also from a smaller, distinct point near the parietal ridge. These were compression fractures, not just impact fractures. They suggested two distinct, separate forces, applied in quick succession, or perhaps a single complex force that wasn't a simple fall. He didn't just fall. The gravel crunched under the tires of my rented sedan as I navigated the winding, overgrown drive leading to the estate. Dawn was still a muted suggestion, a faint gray wash against the eastern sky, but I had already been up for hours. The memory of the previous night's transfer, the hushed journey to the abandoned branch bank old safety deposit room, still lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. The historian's remains were secured, but the questions they posed were anything but. My next logical step was the source, the dig site itself. The estate, even in the pre-dawn gloom, possessed a formidable, almost oppressive air. Ancient oaks, gnarled and heavy with age, stood guard, their branches skeletal against the pale sky. I parked near a cluster of maintenance sheds, the engine ticking softly as it cooled. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. My breath plumed in front of me. I made my way toward the fenced-off archaeological trench, a deep scar in the meticulously manicured grounds that looked, in this light, like a fresh wound. The site was quiet, deserted. Tarpaulins, heavy with morning dew, covered the exposed earth, secured by sandbags. Tools lay neatly arrayed on a workbench under a makeshift canopy, suggesting a sudden halt to operations rather than a gradual winding down. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing across the excavated layers. I moved methodically, my gaze sweeping for any anomaly, any deviation from what a professional archaeological team would leave behind. The ground underfoot was soft in places, firmer where the heavy clay dominated. Then I saw it. Near the edge of the trench, partially obscured by a fallen section of the tarp, was a patch of recently disturbed soil. Not the careful, stratified disturbance of an archaeological dig, but a rougher, shallower churn. It looked fresh, less than a day old. I knelt, running a gloved hand over the disturbed earth. It was looser than the surrounding soil, lacking the compaction that even a few days of rain or wind would impart. My light caught something else, glinting faintly in the loose soil. A small, irregular shard. I carefully picked it up. It was a fragment of pottery, no larger than my thumbnail. The exterior was a deep, lustrous black with an almost metallic sheen. But it was the interior, where the clay had fractured, that caught my attention. It was remarkably fine-grained, almost porcelain-like, and bore no resemblance to the rough utilitarian earthenware typical of the region's known historical periods. This fragment spoke of high-fired kilns, of sophisticated ceramic technology. It was anachronistic, wildly out of place. It hummed with an unfamiliar energy, a silent testament to a different time, a different culture entirely. My mind immediately flashed back to the peculiar residue I'd found on the historian's clothes. The pieces weren't fitting, not in any conventional historical puzzle. A sudden, sharp voice cut through the stillness. "Seth, what are you doing here?" I straightened, turning to face the source. He was accompanied by another officer, younger, less assured. "Investigating, detective," I replied, holding up the shard. "Just found something interesting." "Interesting?" The detective scoffed, stepping closer. His boots scuffed the gravel. "We've already been over this. The official report is a tragic accident. Case closed." "Is it?" I challenged, my voice even. "Because this," I held the pottery fragment out, "doesn't fit with anything from the known historical periods of this estate. And the soil here," I gestured to the disturbed patch, "was clearly dug up very recently, outside of the sanctioned archaeological work." The detective barely glanced at the shard. "Look, I understand you're thorough, Seth, but there's pressure from above. The estate management, the local authorities, everyone wants this wrapped up. It's a high-profile family, a tragic loss. No need to stir up ghosts." "Ghosts?" I raised an eyebrow. "Or inconvenient truths?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping, laced with a barely concealed threat. Don't make this difficult. Your role was to examine the remains, verify the cause. You've done that. Now let the local law enforcement handle the rest. We're satisfied." "Satisfied with what, exactly?" I pressed. A historian who knew too much, a fall that doesn't quite add up, and now evidence of clandestine digging for artifacts that don't belong here? My professional opinion is that this case is far from closed. In fact, it's just beginning to open. The detective's jaw tightened. "Consider this a friendly warning. Stick to what you know." His words, intended as a deterrent, only solidified my resolve. They wanted this buried. That meant there was something significant to hide. The drive back to my forensic lab was a blur of focused thought, the detective's veiled threats playing on a loop. I pulled into the deserted industrial park where my lab was housed, the concrete facade of the building looking particularly stark in the morning light. As I approached the main entrance, a subtle detail snagged my attention. The heavy steel door, usually flush with its frame, had a microscopic marring along its edge, just above the primary lock mechanism. My hand went to my holster, my senses immediately heightened. I slid my key into the lock, the tumblers clicking with their familiar rhythm. The door swung inward. Nothing seemed obviously amiss. The equipment was where I'd left it, the workstations tidy. The air, however, was wrong. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of metallic dust hung in the air, a ghost of recent activity. The storage room, the microscope station, the chemical analysis bench, all appeared untouched. But the desk in my office area, usually pristine, had a faint, barely visible smudge on its polished surface, where a file might have been moved. They hadn't taken anything. Not the specialized tools, not the sensitive equipment, not even my personal laptop. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. The pottery fragment felt heavier in my pocket now, a beacon in the escalating tension. The game had just changed. The detective's words, a thinly veiled threat, had only solidified my resolve. But the historian's death, the anomaly of the pottery fragment, and the chilling silence the officer left behind, all pointed to a language far more sinister. I wasn't looking for trouble. Trouble had already found its way to that remote estate. Back in my temporary converted workspace, a rented room in an old, quiet warehouse district, I laid out the pottery fragment under the high-intensity lamps. The detective might warn, but he couldn't stop me from seeing. The fragment itself was small, no larger than my thumb, a curved shard of reddish-brown ceramic. To the naked eye, it presented as a piece of an ancient vessel, perhaps from the Aegean, its surface adorned with traces of what might have been an intricate spiral pattern. I picked up my stereo microscope, adjusting the focus. The first pass revealed the expected. Mineral inclusions in the clay, consistent with geological formations from the region the historian had been studying. The firing temperature, estimated from its vitrification, aligned with ancient methods. It was perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. My finger traced the edge, the break clean and sharp, yet smoothed in places by the passage of time, or so it seemed. Then I shifted the light source, angling it, and saw it. A minute, almost imperceptible sheen where the surface had been repolished. I zoomed in further, pushing the magnification past what most would consider necessary for a simple artifact assessment. The spiral pattern, so convincing before, began to betray itself. The lines, while mimicking the crude beauty of hand-painted ancient designs, possessed an underlying, almost mechanical precision. The pigments, when subjected to a quick spectroscopic analysis, a small handheld device I carried for initial field tests, showed traces of modern binders. Not much, just enough to be suspicious. My breath hitched. This wasn't an ancient artifact. It was an exceptionally well-crafted forgery. Not just a crude replica, but a deliberate, sophisticated attempt to mimic a very specific, rare type of Minoan ware. The level of detail, the choice of clay, the simulated aging, It was masterful. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The historian, a man whose reputation was built on authenticating the genuine, wasn't just researching ancient artifacts. He was likely exposing a high-stakes forgery ring. His tragic fall suddenly shifted from a simple, if suspicious, murder into something far more dangerous, a deliberate silencing. My understanding of the entire case reversed course. This wasn't about an old man and an ancient legacy. It was about modern greed and the ruthless protection of a lucrative illicit trade. I returned to the estate, a new urgency propelling me. The air felt heavier, the grand, aging structure now exuding an oppressive stillness, as if it held its breath, waiting for me to uncover its deeper secrets. I bypassed the areas the local authorities had already scoured, heading straight for the historian's study. The room, filled with towering bookshelves and stacks of research papers, had seemed merely cluttered before. Now, it felt like a labyrinth designed to hide truths. I started with the bookshelves, not for books, but for anomalies. I ran my hands along the spines, feeling for variations in depth, for any loose panels. The detective had focused on obvious hiding spots, but a scholar, especially one investigating something this sensitive, would be subtler. My fingers brushed against a section of aged oak paneling that seemed to recede slightly more than its neighbors. I pressed, then pushed, feeling a faint click. My pulse quickened. Inside, nestled amongst velvet lining, were two items: a slim, nondescript USB drive and a folded piece of parchment. The parchment was old, its edges brittle, but the ink was surprisingly vibrant. It wasn't a historical document, not in the traditional sense. It was a map, hand-drawn, with peculiar symbols and coordinates that didn't align with any known geographical markers. Cryptic, coded, a puzzle. I secured both items, both. My workspace in the warehouse district was adequate for basic analysis, but not for the kind of decryption or intense scrutiny these demanded. I needed somewhere truly isolated, somewhere with the vestiges of impregnable security. My mind immediately went to a location I knew of, a relic of a bygone era, long forgotten by most. The heavy, ornate doors, scarred by decades of disuse, were wedged open, revealing a cavernous interior stripped of its tellers' cages and public counters. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight filtering through the grime-streaked skylights. I navigated the echoing space, my footsteps loud on the grimy marble floor, until I reached the back. Here, behind what once was a reinforced steel door, lay the heart of the bank's old security, the safety deposit vault. It wasn't completely inaccessible thanks to a previous clumsy attempt at salvage, but it was certainly secluded. The heavy, polished steel walls of the vault gleamed faintly in the low light, rows upon rows of empty deposit boxes silently staring back. I found a relatively clean spot on the floor, settling in with a small, portable lamp and my laptop. With trembling fingers, I inserted the USB drive into my machine. The screen flickered, displaying a prompt for a password. I typed in the historian's birth year, then his wife's, then the date of his most famous discovery. Nothing. This wasn't going to be easy. Then I unfolded the map, spreading it out under the lamp. The symbols were unfamiliar, a mix of arcane glyphs and what looked like distorted astrological signs. My gaze traced a series of lines that converged on a single circled point. A location, perhaps? The detective's warning echoed again, but now it sounded less like a threat and more like a challenge. I had found trouble, and it was far deeper and far more dangerous than I could have imagined. I'd chosen this place for its isolation, its formidable reinforced walls, and the sheer improbability of anyone stumbling upon me. The heavy vault door, long since disarmed and propped ajar, stood like a silent sentinel, its steel skin scarred with rust. My portable workstation, a compact marvel of processing power, hummed softly on a makeshift table I'd assembled from two overturned crates. Its intricate lines, once dismissed as decorative flourishes, now screamed hidden meaning. Beside it, my secure tablet displayed the encrypted files I'd managed to extract from the historian's hidden drive, a digital maze of alphanumeric sequences. The detective's veiled warning echoed in my skull. Stick to what you know. What I knew was that the dead spoke in patterns, and I was fluent in their language. This map, these files, they were the historian's final desperate whisper. My initial approach to the map was a multispectral analysis. I ran it under UV, then infrared, hoping for hidden inks or pressure marks. The parchment absorbed the light unevenly, highlighting subtle variations in the paper's fiber, minute shifts in the ink's composition. They weren't random. They formed a sequence, a visual cipher. I cross-referenced the symbols with the historian's notes, a collection of obscure academic papers and personal annotations I'd also recovered. He'd meticulously documented variations of ancient scripts, forgotten heraldry, and even a few esoteric alchemical symbols. It was a slow, painstaking process, like trying to assemble a mosaic from fragments scattered across centuries. Hours bled into one another, the only sound the tap-tap of my keyboard and the low thrum of the cooling fans. My eyes burned, but the adrenaline coursing through me kept fatigue at bay. Then, a breakthrough. It wasn't a direct translation, but a key. Each symbol corresponded to a letter, not of our alphabet, but an ancient, rarely used phonetic system. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering the derived sequence into a custom decryption algorithm I'd written years ago for an archaeological project involving deciphering funerary texts. The map began to yield its secrets. Not a geographical map in the conventional sense, but a network diagram. Intersecting lines connected seemingly disparate locations. Old European cities, remote archaeological sites, and a surprising number of private estates, one of which I recognized instantly as the site of the historian's demise. Small, elegant sigils marked each node, symbols that, once decoded, pointed to powerful, entrenched families and institutions. Names I recognized from financial pages and historical endowments, not criminal records. This wasn't about petty theft. This was about influence, about deep roots. With the map partially deciphered, I turned my attention to the encrypted files. They were far more robust, layered with multiple encryption protocols. The historian hadn't wanted these found easily. I spent another agonizing hour bypassing the first two layers, my brow furrowed in concentration, the quiet hum of the room a constant companion. The third layer was a beast, an adaptive algorithm that fought back, attempting to lock me out. I could feel the heat radiating from my laptop, a testament to the computational power it was expending. Finally, with a soft chime, the last layer broke. A torrent of documents, correspondence, and ledgers flooded my screen. I scanned through them, my gaze snagging on recurring phrases. The legacy. The keepers. These weren't casual mentions. They were almost reverent, capitalized like proper nouns, appearing in hushed tones within encrypted emails between individuals using code names. The documents detailed transactions involving artifacts that defied provenance, objects described with such reverence they seemed more mythical than material. Not just forgeries, as I'd initially suspected with the pottery fragment, but genuine, priceless relics, their origins obscured, their existence manipulated. One memo, dated 3 years prior, discussed recontextualizing the narrative around a certain Iron Age burial site, suggesting the deliberate alteration of historical records to suit a particular agenda. Another spoke of securing access to a recently discovered Roman villa, not for archaeological preservation, but for acquisition and controlled dissemination. My stomach tightened. This wasn't about black market sales for quick profit. This was about power, about controlling the past to shape the present. The wealthy collectors weren't just buyers. They were patrons, orchestrating a grand deception. The shadowy historical societies weren't merely academic clubs. They were the architects of this revised history. A list of names, codenamed the Council, appeared frequently, associated with massive financial transfers. These weren't just individuals. They were dynasties, their influence woven into the fabric of global finance and politics. My mind raced, connecting the dots. The historian's meticulous research into obscure artifacts, the deliberate misdirection at the estate, the anachronistic pottery fragment. It was all part of a larger, far more sinister tapestry. The historian hadn't just stumbled upon a conspiracy. He'd been actively investigating the keepers, trying to expose how they were systematically altering the historical record, acquiring and suppressing genuine artifacts, and even fabricating new narratives to justify their control. I leaned back, the old crate creaking beneath me, the weight of the discoveries pressing down. But I couldn't unsee what I'd found. The dead historian had left a breadcrumb trail, and I was following it straight into the heart of a truth more dangerous than any lie. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was no longer just investigating a death. I was uncovering a war for history itself. Rising Action 5. The shadowy historical societies weren't merely academic circles. They were something far more sinister. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. My thoughts raced, connecting the dots. Dr. Finch's meticulous nature, the anachronistic details at the estate, the mineral dust, the coded notes. Finch had gotten too close. I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Alistair Humphrey. A retired curator from the City Museum, Alistair had been a mentor to Dr. Finch, and more importantly, a confidant. He was a walking encyclopedia of obscure historical societies and forgotten figures. If anyone knew about the kind of organization I suspected, it was him. "Seth, is that you?" Alistair's voice was raspy, tinged with a weariness that made me uneasy. "It's been too long." "Alistair, I need your help. It's about Finch," I said, cutting straight to the point. There was a pause, a heavy silence that spoke volumes. "What about him?" I explained everything, from the suspicious circumstances of Dr. Finch's death to the coded notes and the unique mineral dust. I laid out my theory about a secret society manipulating historical finds. When I finished, he sighed, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to carry the weight of decades. I hoped this would stay buried. He said, finally. But I suppose it was only a matter of time. "What was?" I pressed. "The keepers," he said. "Their goal isn't just about wealth. It's about influence, about shaping the narrative of history to suit their own agendas." My stomach tightened. "How do they operate?" "They have agents everywhere," Alistair explained. "Wealthy patrons who fund expeditions, academics who bury inconvenient truths, and collectors who acquire artifacts for their private collections." He shared some of his findings with me, but I urged him to drop it. "The keepers are not to be trifled with, Seth." He didn't listen, did he? "No," Alistair said, his voice laced with regret. He was too close to the truth. Owned by the Ainsworth family. They've been rumored to be associated with the keepers for generations. The estate is built on ancient foundations, supposedly containing chambers filled with artifacts. Almost iridescent. The Ainsworth estate. That's where the dust came from. That's where Dr. Finch found something he shouldn't have. "I need to see you, Alistair," I said. "I need to know everything you know about the keepers and the Ainsworth estate. I'm not sure I can help you anymore." "Seth," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "They're always watching." "I understand the risk," I said, "but this is too important." The heavy steel door was padlocked, but Alistair had told me about a side entrance around back. I found it, a narrow, overgrown alley leading to a rusted metal door. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. They might be watching me even now. I pulled up another crate and sat down, my senses on high alert. "Tell me everything," I said. "Everything about the keepers, the Ainsworth estate." The chill of the night air was a familiar accomplice. Alistair's revelations had coiled around me, tightening with each passing hour, leaving me with one clear destination: Elias Thorne's estate. The sprawling property, known for its impenetrable perimeter and the collector's almost paranoid love for privacy, loomed under a sliver of moon. I moved like a shadow, a phantom among the ancient oaks and sculpted hedges, my gear a silent extension of my will. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl sharpened my senses. Thorne was a man who didn't just own artifacts, he guarded secrets. The estate's outer defenses were formidable, a symphony of lasers and pressure plates, but I'd studied the schematics, pieced together from various compromised sources. A blind spot in the infrared grid, a momentary flicker in the motion sensors, a gap I had to exploit with precision. I found the gap near a rarely used service entrance, tucked behind a thicket of overgrown rhododendrons. A swift, practiced cut through the reinforced mesh, a delicate bypass of the magnetic lock, and I was inside the immediate grounds. The main house was a fortress, but my target wasn't the living quarters. Alistair had spoken of a specialized facility, built for a specific, illicit purpose. My internal compass drew me towards a detached wing, a modern addition cloaked in traditional stone, blending almost seamlessly with the older architecture. It was here, I suspected, that Thorne truly conducted his business. The heavy oak door, surprisingly devoid of overt electronic locks, yielded to a set of skeleton keys I'd crafted based on historical lock patterns. Thorne, it seemed, appreciated a certain old-world charm, even in his illicit operations. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of solvents, aged parchment, and something metallic, almost mineral. I was in a workshop. Not just any workshop, but a state-of-the-art forgery operation. Banks of specialized lamps illuminated workbenches cluttered with anachronistic tools. Ancient chisels alongside high-precision microscopes. Brushes of badger hair next to sophisticated spectral analysis devices. Half-finished pieces lay everywhere. What looked like Roman tesserae being aged artificially. Fragments of what could pass for Mayan pottery undergoing painstaking reconstruction, and delicate, almost ethereal scrolls of papyrus being meticulously distressed. The level of detail was staggering, the craftsmanship undeniable. These weren't crude fakes. These were masterpieces designed to deceive even the most seasoned experts. I saw a partially completed Egyptian stela, its hieroglyphs meticulously etched, the stone's patina painstakingly applied to mimic millennia of exposure. This wasn't merely about profit, it was an act of historical subversion. A hidden entrance. My fingers traced the faint outline of a seam, barely visible. It took a moment, a careful application of pressure to a specific point, and the section of wall receded with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a dark corridor. The tension in my shoulders ratcheted up another notch. I was getting closer. The corridor led down, a gradual descent into the earth, the air growing cooler, heavier. The passage was unadorned, utilitarian concrete, until it opened into a vast, unexpected space. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. The sheer audacity, the resources required to move such a structure, were immense. Each box, I knew, held a secret. My task was to find the true artifacts, the evidence of the thefts Alistair had alluded to. I didn't have long. My eyes scanned for any sign of a larger, more significant repository. This was the real trove. The air inside was climate-controlled, sterile. My light-illuminated shelves laden with genuine, priceless artifacts. A golden funeral mask, clearly Egyptian, its eyes staring blankly into the present. Hellenistic bronze statuettes, their forms still elegant despite the passage of centuries. Pre-Columbian goldwork, intricately detailed, shimmering with an ancient fire. These weren't fakes. These were the very pieces that had vanished from legitimate archaeological digs, museum storerooms, and private collections under mysterious circumstances over the decades. The sheer volume was staggering. a monument to greed and historical plunder. I pulled out my compact camera, snapping photographs with meticulous care, documenting the inventory, the labels, the clear signs of their illicit origins. This was the proof. It wasn't local. It was the distinct sound of a security system engaging. A proximity alert. Thorne's advanced systems had found me. I had tripped something, perhaps a pressure plate I'd missed, or a thermal sensor that had finally registered my body heat through the insulated walls. The hydraulic hiss of the main vault door, the one leading back to the corridor, began to echo. It was closing. Not slowly, but with a deliberate, accelerating momentum. I had seconds. I jammed the camera back into my bag, spun on my heel, and sprinted back through the aisles of safety deposit boxes. The gap was narrowing, the heavy steel portal grinding shut with an ominous finality. I launched myself forward, a desperate lunge, sliding under the last sliver of opening just as the door sealed with a resounding thud. My shoulder scraped against the rough concrete, a sharp pain blooming, but I was out. Trapped inside would have meant a very different and likely permanent end. I didn't pause. I scrambled back up the corridor, adrenaline overriding the ache, the knowledge of what I'd found overriding everything else. The exit from the detached wing was still open, the path back to the perimeter still viable. But the hunt was on, and I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. But not to it, not yet. First, I needed to process what I already had, away from prying eyes. A former colleague, a retired officer with a network of discreet contacts, had granted me access to a place he assured me was off the grid. I pushed open the heavy, dented steel door, its hinges groaning like an ancient beast. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, forgotten paper, and the metallic tang of decay. Empty teller cages stood like skeletal sentinels. I navigated through the lobby, past overturned desks and file cabinets spilling their yellowed contents, until I reached the back. The vault door, though unlatched, still weighed a ton. I wrestled it open, its grind echoing in the cavernous space. I set up my portable forensic kit on a salvaged, wobbly table, arranging my tools. Microforceps, petri dishes, a high magnification lens, and a small, powerful LED lamp. My laptop hummed to life, its screen a beacon in the gloom. The evidence from Thorne's estate lay before me, carefully catalogued. The soil samples from the ornate garden, the gravel path, the less trafficked, overgrown perimeter, the fiber lifts from a loose thread on a velvet curtain near a dislodged window frame, the residue from a faint, almost invisible scuff mark on an old flagstone patio. I had also brought back my initial findings from Finch's body in the initial scene, the anomalous soil embedded in his boots, the unique fabric strands, the minute fractures on his skull. I began with the photographs, hundreds of them, detailing every square inch of Thorne's property I'd managed to access. I cross-referenced them with the geographical data I'd pulled, mapping out the estate's topography. My fingers, calloused from years of meticulous work, moved with practiced efficiency. I loaded the soil samples from Finch's boots onto a slide, examining them under the lens. The granular structure, the mineral inclusions, all familiar from my initial assessment. But it was a particular, almost microscopic cluster of fossilized pollen that had always nagged at me. It wasn't typical for the region. I had marked it as an anomaly, a detail that didn't fit the tragic fall narrative. Now I switched to the soil samples I'd painstakingly collected from Thorne's estate. I went through them systematically. The cultivated garden beds, nothing. The gravel path, nothing. The perimeter near the old stone wall, still nothing. My gaze drifted to the last sample, labeled Sector Gamma, Overgrowth West Flank. This was from a part of the estate I'd had to climb over a dilapidated fence to access, a section Thorne's staff clearly neglected, choked with ancient gnarled trees and thick underbrush. It felt I'd forgotten. I prepared the slide, my breath held. Under the lens, the granular structure of the soil appeared. And then there it was. Not just a similar pattern, but an exact match for the peculiar microfossilized pollen cluster from Finch's boots. The specific geological signature, the unique mineral inclusions. They were identical. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't a random transfer. This was a direct, undeniable link. Revealed discovery. The pollen, I realized, was from a species of flora long extinct in this immediate region, but known to thrive in a very specific, geologically ancient type of soil, typically found associated with deeply buried, undisturbed strata. This wasn't just dirt from Thorne's backyard. It was dirt from an ancient ground disturbed recently. The Sector Gamma sample from Thorne's estate wasn't just overgrown. It was concealing something, likely an illicit excavation site, or a temporary cache for newly unearthed artifacts. Finch had been there, and he hadn't left alive. Finch, the historian, had stumbled upon the Keeper's activities, likely involving these ancient artifacts. Thorne, the collector, was not just acquiring, but actively excavating from ancient protected sites, using his estate as a cover. The fall was a calculated deception, designed to obscure the true origin of the soil on his person, the true location of his last moments. The implication settled heavily, a cold stone in my gut. Thorne hadn't just murdered Finch. He was at the heart of the Keeper's conspiracy, using his vast resources and influence to plunder historical sites and trade in irreplaceable relics. My life was now gravely at risk. I had moved beyond merely investigating a suspicious death. I was unmasking a criminal enterprise with powerful, entrenched roots. Presenting this to a potentially compromised police force was a high-stakes gamble. I couldn't trust just anyone. I needed to build a case so irrefutable, so forensically sound, that it would bypass any attempts at obfuscation or corruption. I spent the next several hours meticulously documenting every single piece of evidence, cross-referencing my findings with satellite imagery, historical maps, and geological surveys I'd downloaded. I created a digital presentation, concise and damning, each slide a bullet point in Thorne's indictment. The pollen, the soil composition, the specific fracture pattern on Finch's skull consistent with a struggle on uneven ground, not a clean fall. The fiber from Thorne's estate, a rare weave found on Finch's jacket, suggesting proximity and contact. My back ached, my eyes burned, but my mind was sharp, focused. The case was built. The evidence woven together formed an unbreakable chain. I had the truth. Now I just had to deliver it without becoming another casualty in the Keeper's forgotten legacy. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, a narrow tunnel of light in the cavernous vault. I moved methodically, my boots crunching on plaster dust and fallen debris, a stark contrast to the quiet reverence I usually afforded archaeological sites. This wasn't about uncovering the past. It was about exposing a deliberate perversion of it. My gaze settled on a section of boxes near the back, partially obscured by a fallen ceiling panel. They looked identical to the others, yet something felt off. The dust layer was thinner, disturbed, as if recently accessed. I ran a gloved hand over the cold metal, my fingers tracing faint, almost invisible scratch marks around one particular box, number 314. Not the usual wear and tear, but the delicate, precise scoring of a tool used to pick a lock. The lock itself was a relic, but not impenetrable to someone with the right skills and the patience. I retrieved a set of specialized picks from my field kit. My breath hitched as the tumblers clicked, a series of tiny metallic whispers. The small brass door swung open with a faint sigh, revealing not empty space, but a tightly packed, leather-bound ledger and a handful of encrypted data sticks. My fingers trembled slightly as I pulled out the ledger. Its pages, brittle with age, were filled with meticulous handwritten entries. Dates, names, locations, and codes I immediately recognized as references to historical periods and specific artifact types. It was a detailed inventory, a manifest of stolen heritage. More damning, though, were the entries marked with a distinctive, archaic symbol, a stylized serpent entwined around a laurel wreath, the very symbol I'd found subtly carved into the base of the anachronistic pedestal at the estate, and later etched into the broken locket near the historian's final resting place. This was the Keeper's insignia, clear as day. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the chilling list. Romanov emeralds, secured. Pharaoh's scepter, moved. Byzantine codex, acquired. And then a recent entry, Finch collection, recovered. The historian's personal trove, the one he was so fiercely protective of, categorized here as mere inventory. Thorne's name appeared repeatedly, sometimes as overseer, sometimes as the benefactor. The data sticks, I suspected, held the digital records, the true depth of this insidious operation. My mind raced, piecing together the final puzzle. Thorne wasn't just dealing in illicit antiquities, he was curating a specific narrative, eliminating anything that contradicted his twisted version of the past. The historian had been a direct threat, his independent research on the true origins of the estate's artifacts likely too close to the truth. There was no time to hand this over to the authorities. Not yet. Thorne was a master manipulator, deeply entrenched. He would have contingencies. I had to face him directly, expose him before he could bury this, just as he tried to bury the historian's truth. The evidence I held was a bomb, and I intended to detonate it in his gilded cage. My heart hammered, a steady, insistent rhythm against my ribs. But it wasn't fear. It was a surge of righteous anger. I pulled up to the main house, the grand facade mocking me with its silent opulence. A groundskeeper, a stoic man with calloused hands, met me at the entrance. "The owner is expecting no visitors, Professor," he said, his voice flat. "Tell him I have something he'll want to see," I replied, my voice calm, belying the storm brewing within me. "Something from Safety Deposit Box 314. The groundskeeper's eyes flickered. A momentary tremor of recognition. He hesitated, then nodded, disappearing into the mansion's depths. Moments later, Thorne himself emerged, his usual polished composure ruffled, a faint flush high on his cheekbones. His gaze swept over me, sharp and calculating. "Seth," he began, his voice surprisingly steady. "A rather late hour for a social call." "This isn't social, Thorne," I stated, stepping further into the grand foyer, the air suddenly thick with unspoken tension. The scent of old money and freshly cut flowers filled the space, a stark contrast to the mildewed vault. "It's an eviction notice. For the keepers and your entire operation." Thorne's smile tightened, a predator's grimace. "I'm afraid I don't follow." I pulled the evidence bag from my satchel, holding up the leather-bound ledger for him to see. "This, Thorne, is your meticulously kept confession. Every stolen piece, every manipulated historical fact, every name involved in your grand charade. And the data sticks? I imagine they fill in the blanks digitally." His eyes narrowed, flicking from the ledger to my face. A dead end for the curious. "Not for me," I countered, my resolve hardening. "You left a trail, Thorne. The anachronistic details, the specific tools used, the symbolism. You were so proud of your legacy, you couldn't resist leaving your mark. The historian found your mark, didn't he? A sentimentalist who couldn't see the bigger picture. Some truths are better left undisturbed, Seth. For the ledger." I anticipated it, pulling the bag back sharply. "That's evidence, Thorne. And it's already secured elsewhere. Copies are with people who will ensure it sees the light of day, even if something were to happen to me." It was a bluff, partly. The copies were still uploading, but he didn't need to know that. Thorne's face contorted, a primal rage twisting his features. He lunged, a sudden, desperate movement. Not the elegant scholar, but a desperate man cornered. I sidestepped, my training kicking in, and he stumbled, crashing into a priceless display cabinet. Porcelain fragments scattered across the polished floor. "You won't get away with this," he snarled, scrambling to regain his footing, his eyes darting around the expansive foyer as if searching for an escape. "A weapon. The keepers will ensure it." "The keepers are finished, Thorn," I stated, my voice ringing with a conviction I truly felt. "The historian's justice begins now." The air still hummed with a residual charge, a silent echo of the confrontation. Thorn, stripped of his composure, had been led away by the uniformed officers, his grand edifice of control crumbling around him. I watched him go, a sense of grim satisfaction warring with the exhaustion that threatened to pull me under. The historian's justice, I'd said. Now the laborious process of delivering it truly began. The detective, a woman whose sharp eyes had missed nothing during the raid, approached me. "We've got a lead on the artifacts, Seth. Thorn's last known secure location, an old bank vault." My muscles screamed in protest, but the adrenaline still coursed, a stubborn current. "Let's go." The drive was short, but the journey felt immense. The building's facade was scarred, windows boarded, but the heavy, ornate doors still spoke of a forgotten era of security. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The main hall, stripped of its teller's cages and customer desks, was a cavernous space where shadows clung to every corner. My boots crunched on scattered plaster and broken glass. We navigated through the desolate lobby, past the empty manager's office until we reached the back. It was a formidable sight, a relic of an age when wealth was stored in physical form, protected by layers of hardened steel and intricate locking mechanisms. A team of specialists, already on site, was working meticulously, their tools whining and grinding against the ancient metal. The tension in the cramped space was palpable, a low thrum beneath the mechanical assault. Every spark from the cutting torch illuminated the determined faces of the workers, the watchful gaze of the detective, and my own anticipation. But in the center, on a custom-built display platform, lay the true prize. It was a collection that stole the breath from my lungs. Scrolls, their parchment brittle with age, covered in hieroglyphs and symbols I recognized from the historian's research. And a small obsidian dagger, its hilt carved with a familiar, unsettling crest, the mark of the keepers. The very legacy Thorn sought to bury. The detective nodded, her expression grim, and the evidence to expose the keepers once and for all. As the specialists began carefully cataloging and removing the artifacts, the immediate threat was gone, the puzzle solved, but the weight of what I had uncovered settled deep within me. The historian had died fighting to bring these truths to light, and now, through my work, his sacrifice would not be in vain. This wasn't just about money. It was about power, about controlling the narrative of existence itself. The following weeks were a blur of depositions, detailed reports, and interviews. Thorn's network, built on corruption and intimidation, unraveled with astonishing speed. The media, initially skeptical, soon devoured the story, exposing the conspiracy to a world hungry for truth. I watched the news reports, saw the faces of the other members of the Keepers revealed, their carefully constructed facades shattered. There was no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, had prevailed, but the emotional and psychological toll was immense. The historian's ghost lingered, a reminder of the fragility of life and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. I had walked a dangerous path, faced down a powerful adversary, and emerged changed. Sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by my own books and research, I reflected on the profound impact of truth. It wasn't always clean, wasn't always easy, but it was essential. My forensic science, once confined to the quiet contemplation of the past, had become an active force in the present. The world was full of forgotten histories, buried secrets, and those who would exploit them. A new resolve began to solidify within me. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The pursuit of justice, I realized, was not a singular event, but a continuous, often perilous journey. Perhaps my role in it was evolving. Perhaps I was no longer just an anthropologist deciphering the past, but something more, an investigator, unearthing not just bones, but the very lies that sought to bury them. The thought, once daunting, now felt like a calling, a dangerous new chapter waiting to be written.